Hello everyone and welcome. In this video I'll be sharing my thoughts on the latest episode of The Walking Dead, Stradivarius. As always with these videos I won't be holding back on any spoilers, so please do keep that in mind. Anyway, without further ado, let's begin. Now I don't think there's any point of me beating around the bush with how I feel about this episode, so I'm just going to let you know straight from the get-go that for me this was a flat-out disappointment. Compared to the rest of the season, this entry really was a bit of a drag, and this is the first time since Kang took over the helm that I can say that I found myself bored whilst watching The Walking Dead. The main issue I have is that the narrative really does come to a standstill this week, as it so often does on the show during the episode prior to the mid-season finale. Up until now this season hasn't had a problem with pacing, however this entry reminded me of the typical filler type episode that we sadly became accustomed to when my old pal Gimple was steering the ship. For the purpose of these reviews I always take notes as I watch each episode, just so I can remember as much as possible when it comes to writing the script. Normally I find that I write around at least 2 pages of notes, however this time I struggled to fill up 1 page just because I found that not a lot really happened. So if you are wondering why this review is shorter than usual, then that's why. Stradivarius opens with a bang but quickly peters out. It teases the viewer into thinking they're going to experience something phenomenal, however sadly the opening minute is as good as the episode gets, with the rest of the runtime being disappointing in comparison, a bit like how my wife would describe me in bed. The opening scene of Rosita running through the woods with the Whisperer's gravelly voices playing in the background is a fantastic introduction. The scene brilliantly conveys just how scared and confused the normally headstrong Rosita is during that moment. When she fell to the floor and passed out with the opening credits playing immediately after, I thought we might be in for something special. However, Rosita only appears once more during this episode at around its halfway point, with the Whisperers being relegated to the background for the rest of the installment in preparation for what I assume is going to be their big reveal next week. The problem with having such a brilliant opening to the episode is that when the show shifted back to the other characters, I just found myself wanting to go back to Rosita to find out more about the Whisperers. It's not that I dislike Magna and the rest of her group, or Daryl and Carol for that matter, but it's the bloody Whisperers. The Whisperers, come on! I want to see them, instead I have to sit through some guy crying about a pissing violin. Or should I say Stradivarius, whatever the hell it's actually called. Anyway, moving on from the opening, the rest of the episode focuses its attentions on 3 different groups of characters. The first group that I want to talk about consists of Daryl, Carol and Henry. After learning how to talk once again this season instead of just grunting all the time, it appears Daryl has gone back to what he does best, being a mopey, depressing bastard. At first I was kind of annoyed in watching Daryl play the miserable loner once again, however by the end of the episode I was much more receptive. I liked his explanation as to why he was living out in the woods on his own. He said that he found himself out there initially looking for Rick's body before deciding to stay, purely because he discovered that he just wanted to be by himself. I can understand why he would prefer his own company, seeing as pretty much everyone he cares about has died during the apocalypse, and perhaps he also feels guilty about what happened to Rick as well. Oh, and he also has a dog now, whose name is Dog. Dog the dog. Genius. Imagine if he had kids, he just called them Boy Dixon and Girl Dixon. Joking aside, his decision to name his dog Dog, or rather not to name him or her at all, is actually in keeping with his character. Daryl likes to act the tough guy, he pretends not to care about anyone, and people don't give names to things that they don't have an attachment to, which could be why he just refers to his dog, as he doesn't want to give the impression that he actually loves the little fluffball. Also, he might not have thought that his dog would survive for that long, so perhaps he didn't want to give a name to something that he thought would die after a short amount of time. Anyway, the point is, even if it does seem a bit bizarre at first, Dog the dog does actually make sense. There's not really an awful lot else to talk about in terms of Daryl, Carol and Henry. I mean, Daryl does the typical moody character thing of refusing to take Henry under his wing before then bonding with him and changing his mind. It's all very cliche and predictable, to be honest. Despite this, I do find that Henry is quite likeable, which isn't something I'd ever thought I would say when his character was first introduced. I did find that Carol, however, was completely wasted this episode, and hopefully she will do more next week than just hiding in some bushes. Finally, before I move on, Daryl is also shown to have an X-shaped scar on his back in a similar vein to Michonne, which means they were likely together when they both got them, which makes me think it's probably some kind of brand or mark. We'll just have to wait and see what comes of it. Next up, I want to talk about Magna and her group, who spent the majority of the episode travelling to Hilltop with Michonne. For the record, I do still like Magna and all the other new characters, but again, like many of the cast this week, they didn't have enough to do, and what they did do has been done many times before. Seeing them argue amongst themselves about whether to trust Michonne or not, and Magna getting annoyed about not having access to their weapons didn't really interest me because we've seen this kind of conflict play out so many times already. I don't really think we learnt an awful lot about the new group this episode either. Well, apart from the fact that a couple of them use slingshots as weapons, and that Magna really has a thing for guys in awful patterned shirts. Also, I do get that Magna was upset about seeing her friend as a walker, but the audience just doesn't care. We don't know this guy, and this is just another moment to add to a long pile of Walking Dead characters crying about people who we don't give a shit about. I would say that the only worthwhile thing to come out of this side plot is that we found out via Sadiq that Maggie had left the hilltop with Herschel to go live with Georgie. It seems a bit weird that someone would make Sadiq promise not to say anything to Michonne, but hopefully the show can provide a decent answer as to why this is the case in the future. Also, is it me or does Sadiq just have the most pointless ponytail ever? It's like he's just grabbed a random clump of hair on the back of his head and decided to tie it up. Why? Just why? Sort that shit out, son. Anyway, with Maggie no longer residing at the hilltop, Jesus is the one who finds himself now in charge, something which I do feel he deserves after everything he's done for the community. Thankfully, that means that Enid is still a nurse rather than the leader, which was something I was worried could potentially happen last week. Despite Jesus being clearly popular with the hilltop residents and someone you'd think would make a good leader, he's just not cut out for sitting around all day dealing with petty things like noise complaints. Instead, he wants to be out fighting and walking in on random people in bed like a bloody weirdo. Tara, on the other hand, seems more suited for this role. She's more organised and seems to be able to get things around the community done. Most people know that I'm not too keen on Tara. I mean, who is? And she's gotten extremely annoying as the show's gone on. However, she was bearable this week and I didn't mind seeing her as much as I thought I would. Apart from that, again, I'm really struggling to find anything else to talk about here. I mean, Jesus met up with Aaron in what could be foreshadowing the pair of them getting together, but that isn't exactly groundbreaking or anything. Daryl arrives at Hilltop and wants to go out with Jesus to find Eugene, which is cool I guess, but we won't get to see anything happen with this until next week anyway. And that's just about how I feel about the entire installment really. I've probably spent longer talking about the opening minute with Rosita than the rest of the episode itself, because to be honest, just not a lot else really happens, and what does happen only seems to exist just to set up future events. Magna and the group still haven't arrived at the hilltop, Rosita didn't get the chance to talk to anyone about the Whisperers this episode, nor did we learn anything more about them or see them after the opening. Daryl now has a dog and headed off with Carol and Henry. Jesus doesn't like being in charge, having to deal with petty complaints for the people, whereas Tara doesn't seem to mind. And that's about it really. Honestly, I think if you use what I just said as a summary, you can skip this episode entirely and be fine going into next week's mid-season finale. The last time I found myself having so little to talk about after watching an episode of TV was when I was torturing myself trying to review the latest season of Fear the Walking Dead. Now, I'm not saying that I dislike this episode as much as I did when I was watching Fear, but like that show's latest season, this installment of The Walking Dead felt aimless and rather limp. I don't want to be too defeatist, as up until now this season has been of superb quality, and even the best seasons of The Walking Dead contain some episodes that aren't great, as I think that's just one of the problems in having 16 episodes per season, but I just can't help feel frustrated by how awful this entry is compared to the rest of what we've seen so far this year. I said last week that I'd gotten back to the point where I was excited to watch The Walking Dead again instead of dreading it like some kind of chore, and I was excited to watch this episode, but sadly it just didn't do anything for me. In my mind, this is easily the worst episode of this season so far, but I am still optimistic that next week things can get back on track and this season can go into its winter break on a high note. So there you have it, that's the end of the video. What did you think? Do you agree with me, or did you actually enjoy this episode a lot more than I did? Whatever your thoughts, please let me know below, and until next time, thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.